You're right there guys, this is Dale of Lone Wombat Airsoft, and today I'm going to be tackling the question of what weight of BB you should be using during airsoft games. So I'm going to go over a brief basic principle of what the mechanics are of the BB whilst it travels from flight from your gun barrel to the target, and using that knowledge and my general experience joining games, I'll draft up some conclusions about what weights you should be using at what power level. And so with that in mind, on we go. So, the first thing I'll be going over then is why we're actually using BBs in our sport as opposed to any other shape of projectile. Like, why spheres are we firing those at each other? Well, for one thing, they're omnidirectional, so they're good ease of use. You just dump them straight into the magazine, you don't have to point them in a certain way, you can fill a mag up with a lot of them, leading to high capacity mags. They're cheap to manufacture, and also they've got good manufacturing consistency. This means that they're going to be very similar to the previous ones. When you fire them in the air, they're going to roughly go in the same direction. They're lightweight and they're safer than other projectiles. Because they're lightweight, they're less damaging than a paintball would be, for example. There's less mass behind it. But also because it's a sphere and not a pointed projectile, when it hits something it's less likely to pierce. I mean, it will if it goes fast enough, but it's less likely to do so because it spreads that impact out over a slightly larger area. So they're a good couple of plus points for using BBs, but they're not without their drawbacks. The main one being that whilst they are aerodynamically consistent, they're not aerodynamically efficient. A sphere has pretty high drag when it travels through the air, especially compared to something like a bullet, for example, with a pointed end, because that'll cut through the air with a lot less resistance. Bullets as well, when they fly through the air, they've been, because of the rifling in a gun barrel, they'll twist as they fly to produce a more stable flight pattern, and it's much harder to achieve that with a BB, getting it to spin about the same axis as a bullet would. But this is where the hop-up unit of an airsoft gun comes into play. So it is actually extremely difficult to get a spherical object to spin upon its axis parallel to the direction of travel, much like an actual bullet does. It's hard to do it consistently. This is why airsoft gun barrels are smooth and not rifled like real steel firearms are. Since it's more difficult to do this, we don't attempt that. We attempt a different kind of spinning in the form of backspin. This is achieved by the hop-up unit. Now, what the hop-up actually is it's a little chamber just before the majority of your airsoft gun barrel that the BB rests in before it's fired. As it goes through, there is a nub and a rubber bucking on the inside of this hop-up chamber that protrudes into the top of the gun barrel just above the BB. As the BB passes through it, it catches on the top end of the BB, causing it to spin in a backspin manner as it leaves the barrel. How much spin this causes is dictated entirely by how deep the hop-up unit is pressed into the barrel, which is adjusted by how much hop we put on in various manners. Some guns use dials, some have Allen keys, some have sliders, but they all produce the same effect. This is why if you have no hop-up whatsoever on your gun and you'll fire it, the BB will come out at an actually quicker velocity because there's no obstruction causing it to slow down and backspin, but it will just drop in a parabolic arch straight out the front. But if you have too much hop-up, you can actually jam the BB inside the barrel. Essentially, the nub is pressing in so deep the BB can't fit through anymore and it can't brute force its way out. So this is why it's key to find a balance between how much hop and how much spin we put on the BB. But why do we want it backspinning at all? Well, the reason for this is it takes advantage of something called the Magnus effect. As that BB is spinning throughout the air and it's passing through the air itself, it's actually catching the top bit of the air and throwing it out and downwards behind the BB. And because everything has an equal and opposite reaction, because that downward wind is going that direction, it actually lifts the BB in an upwards direction, thus meaning that a BB travelling at the exact same speed with backspin will actually go for longer because it stays in the air for longer, still travelling at the same speed, but because it's kept above the ground for longer, it'll gain more distance. So, what's all this information got to do with you, the average airsoft player who's in the middle of the game and all you want to do is properly hit your target that's downrange and firing at you? Well, knowing what we know now, we're actually able to, between adjusting the hop-up and selecting the correct BB weight, get more accuracy and more range out of your airsoft gun than if we just chose to leave it with the standard stuff we have. Now, there are three attributes that your airsoft gun has that you want to kind of balance when determining hop-up and BB weight and to get the best performance out of it possible. Those three attributes are accuracy, total range, and time to target. Now, you don't want to max out on any particular one of these because they will sacrifice the other two. For example, say you want to get the absolute maximum range possible out of your airsoft gun. Well, you find yourself the lightest weight BBs you can, crank the hop up to such a degree, but not so much that they jam in the barrel, and prepare to sigh in disappointment as you will never hit anything you point your gun at, as the rounds just skip up into the stratosphere, never to be seen again. Granted, the range they're going to be achieving is going to be immense if you could ever find where they landed, but you're not going to hit anything in game because the rounds are just going to skip up so much. Yeah, they're going to go straight over the heads of your target and bury themselves in a tree. Useless. What about maximum accuracy? That can't be a bad thing, right? Well, to get the absolute tightest grouping out of your gun, you get the heaviest BBs you can find. Hope to God that your hop-up unit is powerful enough to lift them whatsoever, and accept the fact that you're not going to be hitting any targets further than 5 meters away, because whilst your grouping will be insanely tight, these BBs are going to just drop straight out of the barrel, and in a real game term, you're just going to be outranged by practically everything. Again, useless. Well, what about time to target? Well, why is that important, first off? Well, what you'll find is that BBs don't travel to your target instantaneously, and if they're going slow enough and your target's looking at you, he can actually see them coming in and duck back into cover or just casually sidestep out the way. So reducing that means there's less opportunity for your target to get out of the way, or the wind to affect it, or for him to just wander off. So the way you achieve the best time to target is you get the lightest weight BBs possible and you put no hop up on whatsoever. Your shots will go out insanely quickly. They will go all over the place, however, and quite often straight into the ground. They'll get there quickly, mind, but again, not really going to hit anything. So you need to balance these 3 attributes: max range, accuracy, and time to target. And this is done by assuming your FPS is fixed because you've hit the sight limit. It's done by selecting your BB weight and playing with the hop up. Now, again, this is down to player preference mostly, because I know some players who like to have the flattest trajectory possible, accepting that they're sacrificing some range to achieve this, but they just like the consistency of knowing where their BBs are going and they're not going to skip over their target at a certain distance. Whereas there are some other players that actually don't mind the fact that their BBs will skip up by quite a huge degree just because they want to get the longest range possible and be engaged in those targets. So it is up to player preference. So accepting that this is player preference, how do we find that perfect balance of the 3 attributes for you personally? Well, I'll use my experience of various weights. We're going to assume that the guns that these weights are going to be fired out of have consistent FPS, and we can't adjust that. The most likely reason for this is you've already hit the max limit that the sight will allow for an airsoft gun. So we'll assume that we're firing out of a 350 FPS AEG, 400 FPS DMR or low powered bolt action sniper rifle, and a 500 FPS fully tuned bolt action sniper. So for the 350 FPS AEG, now the most common weight you're going to find is 0.2 gram BBs. These are probably the cheapest ones you can get for decent actual airsoft BBs, not like the rubbishy toy pellets that you can get for kids' guns. Anything less than a 0.2 gram BB in weight, do not use. They're just going to, consistency is going to be horrible. In actuality, the manufacturing tolerance isn't going to be there either, so they may fragment at certain things. Just don't use any BBs lighter than a 0.2. You never get a good experience out of those. But 0.2s I tend to use for my pistols and shotgun, because with the shotgun I actually kind of do want them to spread a little bit. That is the point of a shotgun. And the pistol, I'm going to be using that at such short range, I don't mind the fact that they're not particularly accurate at any distance. Like, they're there purely because they're cheap and you're going to be using them at a range where that doesn't really matter anyway. If your gun is firing at a solid 350 FPS, however, I find that the best weights to use are 0.25 gram and 0.28 if I can get away with it. 0.25 is just my go-to weight in general. Like, I've never found myself a gun that actually can't lift a 0.25 gram BB. They've got much better consistency than 0.2s. They're not that much more expensive as well. So that's just my general go-to one. I can slam those into a gun and just know they're going to work, and they're going to be relatively consistent, especially compared to a 0.2. If I can get away with it, however, if I'm right on that 350 limit or I've got a decent hop-up unit, I'll use 0.28s. Now, it doesn't seem like a huge difference from a 2.5, but you will actually find they do group a little bit tighter, but also because there's a bit more mass behind them, they're better at cutting through shrubbery and trees and greenery than 0.25s or 2s are. So whereas a target could be sitting in a bush and you wouldn't get him with 0.2s because they're just being deflected by the leaves and the twigs, a 0.28 has just that higher chance of cutting straight through and getting to the target. So if you can get away with it, try the 2.8, but I would say that 0.25 is the general go-to. Now, if you're using something above 350 FPS, say you've got a designated marksman rifle or a very low-powered bolt-action sniper that you've just bought and you've not upgraded yet, and they're both shooting around about 400 FPS, well, 0.3 grams are what I'd go for in that instance. I wouldn't recommend 0.3s in any 350 AEG because it's highly unlikely that the hop will be strong enough to lift them, and even if it does, the FPS isn't quite there to get them to target fast enough. You'd have to set the hop so high that they'd really skip and they're just not consistent. Stick with a slightly lower one. But for 400 or so, 0.3s are actually quite great for it. And you don't want anything heavier in your bolt action sniper rifle if you're shooting about this FPS level, because even though your hop unit might be there, the power isn't. So they won't actually be able to take advantage of the heavier weights. If, however, that bolt action sniper is shooting up to 500 FPS, then by all means go for something heavier. I personally favour 0.36 or 0.4 gram BBs in a 500 FPS bolt action sniper, just because I know that once it's upgraded at this point, the hop is decent enough and there's enough power behind it to get those rounds to the target. The more interesting question I find with a bolt-action 500 FPS sniper, however, is what colour you're going to use these BBs at. Now, I tend to stick to white BBs throughout all of my stuff because I like to see where my shot is going through my scope, I like to see where it lands, and because of that, if I miss, I know where it went, so I know how to correct my aim to make sure the next one doesn't. However, you can see these shots going out, and if your target's looking at you, sometimes he can see them coming in. And it's not the weirdest thing in the world for me to actually have a target see me when I'm firing at them and be able to sidestep the shot. Not because it's going too slow, but because the distance is so great, he has more time to actually see that shot inbound. And the way to fix this is to get a different coloured BB instead of white, something dark and earthy like green or brown. The issue with these is that, granted, your target can't see them coming in, but you can't see them going out. So you need to have complete faith in your rifle build to know exactly where that shot's going every single time, because it's going to be very hard for you to track the shot going out and to know whether you hit your target or not. So then, to summarise, what's a good rule of thumb to use when you're actually trying to determine what BB weight is best for you? Well, I like to try and get away with as heavy BB as I can, just because they will have a tighter grouping than lighter ones. They're less affected by wind, so they'll drift less in flight. They also have the side benefit of actually holding their kinetic energy a bit better than lighter weight BBs, so when they strike the target, they're actually more likely to feel it. But, however, they're not the best for all situations. So the way you determine which BB weight you use, just get a couple to experiment with, is when you're firing your shot, expect it to skip up ever so slightly, but you want to be looking down your red dot sight or your magnified scope, and if for any reason that BB skips up out of your sight picture, like you can't see it through your reticle anymore, then you either need to get a heavier weight BB or just tone down your hop a little bit. If, however, these shots are just coming out and straight down, or they're taking forever to get to the target so your target can see them and just walk out the way, then you might want to consider swapping to a lightweight BB. Now, I hope this BB breakdown has been useful for you guys. I hope it's been helpful. If it has, let me know in the comments section down below, or if you've got any questions for me. And until next time then, this has been Dale of Lone Wombat Airsoft.